Hello, and welcome to episode 2 of Solarpunk Presents, the podcast bringing you a better future today. I'm your host, Christina De La Rocha, and today I'll be talking to a librarian about what libraries can do for you and about what you can do for your library. Because, is there anything more solarpunk than libraries? They serve everyone, rich or poor, giving them the exact same access to books, music, magazines, newspapers, book talks, story hours, the internet, and the assistance of reference librarians. In other words, access to information. They're a place for kids to go after school, for tutors to meet with students, for families to come to together to while away a few hours, and for anyone to come to learn something that opens up possibilities or sends their imagination wandering into impossible worlds. They're also a place to go when it's raining or horribly cold outside. And as long as the library is open and staffed, you know that civilization has not yet collapsed. The librarian that I'm talking to today, Don Gardner, is an old friend of mine, who just retired after 16 years as a librarian for the city of Salinas. Salinas is a town of about 163,000 people, 80% of them Hispanic, Latino, or Latinx, depending on your preference there, many of them farm workers or the families of farm workers. The reason for this is that Salinas, the hometown of John Steinbeck, made famous as a setting for many of his novels, sits in the Salinas Valley, one of the most agriculturally productive regions of California, or even of the entire United States. Strawberries, spinach, kale, lettuce, tomatoes, artichokes, broccoli, Brussels sprouts, cauliflower, grapes, celery, carrots, peppers, and onions are some of the fruits and vegetables grown there. So let's find out from Don what it was like to be a librarian there. Hi, Don.
Hi, Christina.
Let me start the conversation by asking you a little bit about the city of Salinas.
It's in Monterey County, and Monterey County is a huge agricultural force, and they're on, of course, the Salinas River.
Which is probably flooding at the moment in the midst of California's onslaught of atmospheric river storms.
I would also want to mention that it's the largest city in the county. It's over 160,000, so it's far bigger than any of the other cities, even though Carmel and Monterey are more famous, I think, for various reasons.
And have very, very different demographics, and I would imagine very different sort of average incomes. And so it'll be interesting hearing about the situation of the library in Salinas, which is probably nowhere near as well funded as libraries in places like Monterey or Carmel. And yet one would imagine that the need for a library in a place like this is also much higher.
I actually would have to adjust that perspective because I know that Pacific Grove, which is near Monterey, and it's on the water, and it has difficulty funding itself. It's probably because it's a relatively small community, but it's also a very, very wealthy community. And I know they have difficulty keeping funded. So it really has to do with the community itself and how committed they are to library services. That's what brought me to Salinas, because there was a test of the Salinas community's commitment to its library in about 2004, the city council had decided that they needed to close the libraries because they couldn't afford to keep them open. And this caused an uproar. And at the time, the golf tournament that comes to Carmel and attracts lots of celebrities was going on. And Bill Murray heard about the difficulty that the library was having, and he generously offered his winnings, which amounted to $24,000, something like that. I could be wrong, but that's about right.
Hang on. I'm not up on my golfers. Is Bill Murray the actor, or is there a different guy? Oh, okay.
And it got picked up on the wire services, as they called them, and went around the world. And the other celebrity that was important was John Steinbeck. because the main library in Salinas is the John Steinbeck Library, and it made the controversy more recognizable because we had a Nobel Prize winning author whose hometown was Salinas and whose main library and oldest library was named after John Steinbeck. And so people could recognize California, John Steinbeck, and closing a library of a Nobel Prize winner community. So I was working at Bookshop Santa Cruz at the time, and the library director and the assistant director would come in, and part of my job was to assist people from schools and libraries who were buying books with purchase orders. So they would buy a large quantity of books. And so they would spend several hours in the library, and we would have a chance to talk. And
in the library or in the bookshop?
In the bookshop.
In the bookshop, okay.
And so we would have an opportunity to talk, and I was also going to library school at the same time. So as the timing happened, when the difficulties with the library were resolving with the support of people from around the world, literally, sending funds.
Oh my gosh, I remember hearing about this in the news and being moved by the plight of the library. I was living in England at the time, although I still had a bank account in California because that's where I'm from. It was a long time ago, but I'm pretty sure I sent off a little check, like for $15 or something, which in my defense was a little bit more money 20 years ago than it is now. Anyways, it wasn't single-handedly enough to rescue the library, but I did my little bit.
They raised enough money to reopen the library, and I was nearing my graduation, and I was offered to apply when the time came that they could actually start hiring again. And of course I did right away. And when the time came, our first staff meeting, there were 14 staff. And this is 3 libraries serving a community then probably over 140,000. And that's what? 1 to 10,000.
Oh, okay.
Not a good.
That's a lot of book recommendations you have to make.
That's right. That was my introduction to the Salinas Library. And I have to say, I have always had at the core of my relationship to the library and the Salinas community the story of them testing their commitment to the library by having the city council decide they couldn't afford a library, and the city itself, the people in the city itself, deciding we can't afford not to have a library.
Well, so you say you had a lot of support from around the world and from celebrities, and donations came pouring in. But what kind of support did you have then from the people of Salinas?
Actually, there was a very active support. Many people came to rallies and demonstrations and to city council meetings. I suppose the measure of support was very, very strong, and it grew and it grew. I think that it probably helped it grow locally because they would hear about it on the news.
So what was it like to be a librarian in Salinas?
It has changed over the years, of course. It took a while to grow and develop programs. There was still a period of anchoring the support, the financial support. And there were 3 or 4 years after the closure, there were several proposals for funding that to increase funding that came up. And so we always had an eye on our connection to the broader public and raising the issue of the services. With the funding that we got, I believe they raised over $900,000 to reopen the library.
Okay, and so this was donations.
Much of it was donations, yes.
You know, I just always assumed that cities pay for libraries or counties pay for libraries. Where else can a library, aside from donations, where else can a library get money?
The bills or the votes that went to create funding ended up being sales tax. they added a point or, whatever.
Okay, so this is still sort of local city funding.
Very
then.
much. Since Salinas is fortunate in being of a significant enough size that a portion of sales tax or something like that would also be significant. We were at the time, 140,000 folks, and also something of a tourist. We did have people passing through from all over the world just because they were coming to Monterey County anyway. Most of the funding is sales tax. Because of the notoriety of the closure, it was a boon to asking for funding that ended up piggybacking funding for more police, more fire, schools, etc. So they were often bundled together when an opportunity was made to ride the popularity of funding the library with funding for other city services.
So what was your day-to-day like once you secured the funding to keep the library alive?
I always think of it as fun. I was very excited to be a librarian. I had been a bookseller for 26 years before becoming a librarian. Obviously, I love books and reading, so that really helped my orientation in the library. But being a bookseller is not the same as being a librarian in the sense that people voted for library services. We weren't ringing up sales on a cash register. We weren't keeping an eye on sales, which is a motivator, but also a kind of tension. The removal of the tension and the wholehearted commitment of the community to fund the library because of the services themselves was liberating. It meant that my love of public service and of books and literature and the services that we offered was recognized in and of itself as of value.
What services are you talking about that the library is providing?
First and foremost, it's a safe public gathering place for families. There is quite a bit of poverty in Salinas, so I think that is welcome for families that don't have the money to buy the resources like books and movies and music and that kind of thing, or internet access, which has become key as we've gone on. But early on, it was a place to come to that everyone was welcome. And everyone could get help, and everyone could get help answering questions about practical matters in their personal lives, money questions, questions about voting, questions about health.
As a librarian, then, you don't just help people find the books that they need to answer the questions they want to answer or to do their homework report, but you give them answers?
Oh, sure. Obviously, they don't just come off the top of our heads. We connect them with resources, usually. That's how we answer questions. It isn't that we're the authority. We would refer, that's where reference comes from, to legitimate sources of information that our training has taught us are superior to just, say, word of mouth. We were also connected to lots of organizations, one way and another, in the community, so that we could refer people to organizations that can help them with problems or questions.
What sort of organizations?
The Alzheimer's Association, for one thing, they're one of our partners.
So when people came in and they were looking for advice and support, then there were all these community organizations that you could send them to. I would never have thought of going to a reference librarian to ask for a connection like that. So that's good to know. So what were the main things then that you helped people with, aside from connecting them to information?
I like to think that I helped people by making a place where they felt welcome, which was job one, and that they understood that we would do our best to give them the best answers we could to any questions they might have, or to refer them to other organizations that might have good answers. And oftentimes that would mean we might call up an organization and see if they could help and verify before we would send somebody over there. For instance, there's just up the street from the Cesar Chavez Library is a group of lawyers who primarily focus on supporting agricultural workers who have legal difficulties that they're trying to sort out. And so they get free legal or very low cost legal assistance. And the United Farm Workers, which is just up the street, is also another resource if people are having difficulties with that. So we do a lot of local referrals to organizations that are better able to help with people's problems.
So did you end up with a lot of farm workers and farm workers' families as part of your clientele?
Absolutely. The Cesar Chavez Library in particular is in the heart of the neighborhood that many farm workers, tens of thousands of farm workers live. You know, I have to say that's my favorite library. So John Steinbeck isn't the only well-known name in Salinas libraries, I'm happy to say, and a nice counterbalance actually to John Steinbeck. Cesar Chavez didn't win a Nobel Prize, but he may as well have. He could have won a Peace Prize as an example and a leader of the farm workers. He was beloved, and he spent a good deal of time in Salinas. So he was known. There were people who physically knew him, worked with him. So that was an important link to the community, I think, and a source of trust.
What were the main challenges you faced as a librarian?
The main challenges I faced were learning how to be a librarian, how to see the needs in the community and define them and try to find answers to them within the guidelines or the purposes of being a librarian. Much of it's information, but much of it's also learning the community, learning about the community, learning about the problems of the community, and learning about those organizations or those departments of the city or other resources that can help people. So it's a mix of learning about the people and learning about the community itself. And that takes a lot of time. And it takes a lot of just doing the job and doing your best to keep looking until you find the best answers. And also, actually, Salinas was a very old library. Salinas had a very old library, public library system before I got there. So there were answers there in the institution ready for people in the community. But because of the closure, our staffing was cut back so much. We lost a lot of institutional knowledge, a lot of institutional wisdom. And there were still a few librarians who had served for decades there that helped us reconnect with that. But you can't simply transfer somebody to another librarian every time they ask you a question you don't know the answer to. You have to figure out on your own most of the time where the resources are that are going to help the community. And that takes years, actually. And also it takes a willingness to reach out into the community and find people who might have the answers. And so I had to learn as much about the community as I did about any traditional resources that librarians learn about when they're trying to answer reference questions.
So then in your view, the central role of the librarian is what? To connect people with information for what purpose? So it isn't just to help people find books, obviously.
No, I really think we're intermediaries for resources to meet whatever needs the public feels comfortable bringing to the library. And that can run the gamut of need, period. There are also organizations that we could connect people to that needed food assistance, that needed rental assistance, that needed assistance paying their utility bills, that needed assistance with legal problems. And because the community has certain orientations, like to the agricultural workers and the agricultural business, there are long-term organizations like the United Farm Workers that have been there meeting needs. And so part of learning how to help people is learning the community itself. because oftentimes there have been resources developed within the community to meet needs, such as the UFW or the local branches of various national or international organizations like the American Heart Association, or local political leaders who can help on various levels, not just city, but county, etc.
This is interesting. So for you, libraries really sit very deeply in the heart of a community and aren't just there to connect people with entertainment or a little bit of learning and ideas, but actually to connect them with organizations and information that can help them lead more successful or lead better lives, or save them from poverty, or save them from catastrophes or distress. Is this kind of a new thing for libraries?
No.
Is libraries have always played this role?
I think so. Obviously, each library is going to be different, and it's going to be a reflection of the community. But I think libraries arise out of need, and the more broad-minded the library leadership is about what constitutes an appropriate need to try to fill, the different libraries are going to focus on different community problems. They're going to be a reflection of the community itself. I think that my orientation to the library, which was formed in response to meeting the director and the deputy director as they came in to purchase books at the bookstore while I was going to library school, and they would tell me stories about the closure of the library and what it meant, and what they were trying to do to reopen it and keep it going. And that framed everything that followed for me in terms of how I felt about the library and how I felt about the community and how I felt about the staff at the library, that they were dedicated, that the library was loved by many people, and that the library was recognized as extremely important to the health and welfare of all of the citizens. But I think particularly to the folks who don't have the resources in their homes to exercise their curiosity and to find things to read and to find music and to find movies and other resources, and also to be introduced to literacy, because that's one of our functions, is to do story times, for instance, or book clubs or author talks, and also have a variety of events that introduce people to other organizations in the library who have resources that can help them. So we're a gathering place for other organizations as well that we can invite and partner with.
Now I want to ask you what it was like to become a librarian just as the internet was really taking off for the general public. Did you have worries that the internet might make your job as librarian irrelevant?
I don't remember having those kinds of worries. I also quickly became aware that the lack of resources in Salinas for families to use the internet, learn about the internet, learn about the technology, and afford any of it was so great that the library was their link to all of those resources. Today, we still see a great need, and the most common internet connection that many families that come to us for help is a cell phone. It's not a computer. They don't have internet access at home, many of them, although that's changing too. We now have, I believe it's funded by the California State Library, to get mobile hotspots so that they can check them out and bring them home and get internet access at home. Now they're checked out like on a library card, just like anything else, and they're limited in time. I think it's 3 months, 6 months, it depends.
Oh, still, that's pretty good.
And it's because of the funding support from outside the community. That's a very expensive investment to provide that internet access. It isn't foolproof. People still have difficulties with it. And because it's fairly new, that's only in the last year or so. And much of that also was really, I think, pushed by the awareness from I was going to say the epidemic, but COVID, when people were so isolated and so many people dependent upon the internet to connect with resources in the world, and they couldn't because all they had was cell phones. That's the best they could do, and they needed more than that, especially for their kids, I believe, because more and more kids take home computers to do homework on. The internet is a wonderful resource for the library, as well as perhaps a competitor for the attention and the use of the citizens in the community. So it's a mix. I certainly wouldn't want it to go away. I use it all the time to help people find answers and find materials and find connections. Or I did before I retired.
No, but you brought up an interesting point, and that was the COVID pandemic. So I imagine the library must have been physically closed for a year or two.
Yeah, yes, probably about a year. I'm not exactly sure.
How did you fulfill your role in the community if the library was if the doors of the library were closed?
Very strange. That was very strange. Also because the community broadly, the nation, didn't quite know how to deal with COVID. They were learning about it themselves. And I think we probably were out for 6 or 8 weeks where we were literally just closed and mostly at home. And people were doing make work assignments on their computers at home because we couldn't do public service. And we were not gathering in the library because there was so much concern about infection.
And no bookmobile driving either.
No.
So no going out into the communities to sign people up for library cards or to get them books. And what did that feel like as a librarian?
Very weird. And also scary, because if it was so serious it would close the library. You get the feeling that your way of life is threatened. It's destabilizing. And it causes a lot of concern. And of course, people were getting sick and some people were dying. It was scary.
Well, I mean, I worked in 2 libraries when I was a student as a library page, one of the people who shelves the books afterwards. And, library books are disgusting. They're covered in germs. We used to have a book drop that was right next to the public swimming pool. And in summertime, you'd empty the book drops and the library books would be hot and steamy and moist. And I'm sure I was sick all the time.
Oh my, I haven't had that kind of experience, but I know what you're talking about. And I also know that most library books have some kind of protective cover, like a dust jacket, but with clear plastic over the top of it. So we wiped them down.
Well, that must have also been a lot of work.
A lot of work, yes.
So how did you reconnect with people as the pandemic progressed? How did you reach out to your patrons?
We, like pretty much all libraries now, have a public website. And also we would have a newsletter that would go out weekly or monthly to advertise our resources and reach out to the community. There was a real need in the community, and the community did express its opinion about getting us to reopen as soon as possible. They were frustrated that they couldn't exchange materials, but everybody kind of understood that we were going through an extraordinary community-wide experience. Reopening was something we started working on early. It was weird that we closed completely, now that I think about it. But I forget how scary it was.
Oh, no, the first few months of the pandemic were terrifying.
Yeah.
Right? The mortality rate was so high, and you just didn't want to catch that thing.
At any rate, we early on formed a committee for reopening, and I was on that. And we picked to open one branch at a time because we would learn how to do it at that one branch, and then we would work as quickly as we could to open up the other branches. It was also, there were a number of staff that took the chance to retire or simply left. And of course, part-time folks, they stopped working altogether. And part-time folks are an important part of the staff. So our staffing dropped during the closure. And so there were less personnel resources. So we started a committee to try and find out, and a lot of that had to do with researching what other libraries were doing, which is a common thing for libraries to do. Mm-hmm. I'm sure businesses do the same thing.
So when businesses do it, they call it industrial espionage.
Libraries, thankfully, are more open organizations, and sharing their information is core principle.
So do you have conventions where you go meet other librarians?
Oh, golly, yes.
Really?
Oh, sure. Not just
I didn't know this.
Oh, but of course, there are local consortiums. There's one that our library, the Salinas Library, belongs to that reaches up into the Bay Area and has many very large library systems, and they support each other. And they also were a source of information about fixing or reconnecting with the community or connecting in new ways to the community because of the pandemic. Librarians like to collaborate.
Oh my goodness! So there's this secret network of libraries.
Just the opposite. There's no secret. They would be happy to bend your ear if you wanted to hear about them. They'll tell you everything. They'll spill their guts to tell you all about the library if you like. That's not a problem. Librarians love to talk about libraries and what they're doing. So yeah, we got a lot of help from the organizations that we belong to and neighboring librarians, neighboring library systems. We were all talking amongst ourselves. And of course, the internet was the main way to connect with most folks at that time. And librarians love to sharpen their internet skills to face problems. So there was an awful lot of that kind of thing. And interestingly, a lot of it had to do with creating a new model that was safe. I enjoyed working on that committee and trying to find ways to anticipate problems and safe handling of materials and exchanging materials and communicating with the community about what materials we had, and also reconnecting with people who had allowed their library cards to lapse or they'd lost them. But now the library was one of the few places they could get resources that they really wanted, now that so many other avenues for communication were shut down. So we did a lot of learning about how to handle materials, cleaning materials, how things would work with distributing materials. We met people at the door for quite a while, and we would exchange materials that way. Of course, all masked up, wearing gloves. It was strange.
A bit surreal. Okay.
Yes.
Yeah. So that's interesting. So I'm thinking, so if bookstore people are book people, then library people are actually people.
They're people. And they're information people. That's the bridge. That's the exchange. It's information. Library people are and by information, I'm talking about any media and any resource informationally. A picture is information. You know, there are so many forms of information, and the libraries, I can tell you, would be happy to have collections of all the different kinds if they could, but we have to focus on the ones that are most easily exchanged.
So then libraries play this really, really important role in communities and connecting people to the information that they need to improve their lives or live their lives. Do you think libraries are in trouble today, or do you think they're on pretty firm ground?
Both. Libraries are on firm ground at the moment. but they have to keep reinventing themselves all the time to keep pace with cultural change and to meet people where they are. And people are changing where they are. How they get information is changing all the time. So you are a reflection of your community. You're going to seek out and find what the needs are of your particular community, and then you're going to mirror that. Libraries are really a reflection of the community that they support. Of course, they also share with other communities and other libraries, so they try to find innovative ways to serve needs that people may not have even recognized they had. For instance, again, I'm coming back to Alzheimer's Association, probably because I was working with that organization quite a bit in just the last few months. There's a problem that many people don't even recognize. They have a relative that is having difficulty with their memory. They may not be that old. There isn't all one profile, and they don't know what to do or where to go. Mm-hmm. So where do you go to find answers? Well, one place you can go is the library. You can go on the computer, you can call us up on the phone, or you can walk in. I don't know what to do about this, but where do I go to find help for? I think there's something going on with my uncle or my dad or whatever. And the library is the place you can come and ask a question that you haven't a clue where the answer might be. And we're happy to connect people with the best resources that we can find.
That is fantastic to hear. But now let me flip that around and ask not what your library can do for you, but what you can do for your library.
Use it.
That's the most important thing that people can do
Absolutely.
To support their libraries.
Yes, use it.
Okay.
Yeah, go to the library, call the library up, write us an email, contact us however you can, and also encourage your whole family to use it. And actually come as a whole family, please. That's the best thing. And one of the reasons I say that is because the library proves its value to the community by doing the best service it can, and we keep track of the various ways in which people have connected with us. We get numbers and we report those to the Library Commission, to the City Council, to our funders, frankly, and through them to our main funders, which are the citizens of the community that supports us. So the representatives of the community are people that hold us accountable for the funding, and the community itself holds us accountable. So we report regularly to them on the numbers of people coming in, the numbers of materials exchanged, the numbers of interactions that we've had. All those kinds of statistics are kept. But also we tell stories about the library. We tell stories about all the new materials that we've gotten, the new resources, the internet resources that we've gotten. The more ways that we can meet the needs of the community, we try to get that information out to the community as best we can.
Okay, so that sounds like a good parting note. So before I say thank you for this interview, then let me say, listeners, if you're out there, renew your library card, go to your library, ask questions, let your librarians know what it is you need to know to make your life better or more fun or more entertaining or to solve the problems that you have. Okay. So thank you, Don. It's been really, really interesting talking to you today.
Glad to hear that.
Enjoy your retirement and try not to spend all of it at the library.
Okay. Will do. Thank you, Christina.
Thank you for listening to Solarpunk Presents,
a podcast hosted and produced by Ariel Kroon
and Christina Della Rocha.
The audio for this episode was recorded in part on the traditional territory of the neutral Haudenosaunee and Anishinaabe peoples,
and in Germany. The opening and closing music of this podcast is Water Cooler Gang by Monkey Warhol.
Available for use under the Creative Commons Attribution 4.0 International License.
Until the next episode,
keep dreaming
and keep up the good work.